Polite applause, thank you. Happy Halloween. If I do my job well, I will frighten you all. Wow. Professor Zeev asked that I say just a few words before we begin about who I am and what I do. I'm hoping you'll get a better idea by experiencing what I'm going to share with you, and hopefully by learning, using it as you enter the workforce and do work in, hopefully, very high-performing teams. My specialty is collaborative communications. I'm an engineer. I have 2 engineering degrees, chemical and environmental. My graduate degree is here from UC Irvine, so it's nice to be back. And just to give you a quick example of who I serve, just in the last 3 weeks alone, I was in Bangkok, Thailand, doing a version of this training that I'll be giving to you to international marketers for a scientific life sciences company who from Japan, India, Australia, China, Taiwan, etc. Because they felt like these skills are important for marketing. From there, I flew directly to San Francisco, where I taught a version of these skills to software developers in Silicon Valley at a conference in Berkeley. And from there, I came home for a couple days and went straight to San Diego, where I also taught a version of these skills to mostly engineers from Rockwell at a big meeting in San Diego. So what I'm happy to tell you is what you're going to learn will cut across no matter what industry you work for. And hopefully it'll serve you well. The challenge that Professor Zeev had shared with me when he first invited me as your guest last year is that he sees the genius in so many of you. He sees how smart and how capable you are. And I believe there's some heartbreak at times when your employers do not see that. So how can you communicate? How can you work with each other and speak and listen in ways that people recognize your good work and that you recognize each other, that we have a balance in how we show up at work? So at that, let's jump in. In a little while, we're going to be doing a lot of moving around, and you'll be forming with your teams. But for now, you're OK seated where you are. Just be ready, though. At some point, you're going to want to move your things and get ready to relocate. So the general topic, the umbrella under which we're going to learn today, is called collaborative communications. And that's a very large umbrella. The truth is, we're going to focus on a very, very small skill set because we only have about an hour. Truth be told, I could probably keep you here for 10 solid days and keep giving you new material. This is like a martial art. You could learn it and take your lifetime to perfect it. And even the black belts feel like students. So what I hope to give you today is something called the power of observation. It's a very simple technique for helping people agree with you. It also seems to magically reduce drama, reduce controversy, and it also can help, if you have a difficult message to express, for people to hear you without being defensive. And then we have one tool to share with you today. This tool is something that hopefully you can use if you are in a team situation, a coach, a facilitator, if you're doing retrospectives, agile retrospectives. There's lots of applications for this tool to make it easy for people to speak up on what can be done better. And if you use it well, you could probably even use it in your personal life. I challenge you to do that. So before we jump into the content, I really want to anchor what we're going to learn to your world. I told you a little bit about my world. You represent many worlds. And a moving world, because you're about to enter the workforce or graduate school. So tell me, given the profession that you want to engage in, given where you want to use your talents, where is communication and collaboration important? How is it important to you in the way that you want to serve the world? Can we hear from a few students? 1 and 2.
Communicating and collaborating on a possible roadmap or where you're going.
Okay, yeah. Communicating for a roadmap, where are we going? Yeah, that kind of planning.
If software at the end of the day is, if its goal is to communicate information, regardless of platform, regardless of person, then communication needs to be the center of the development process as well as the actual software you're creating.
Absolutely. It is the center, communication is the center of the development process. How many of you are familiar with design thinking? If I were to ask this class 3 years from now, probably every hand will go up. That's my expectation. It's, without going on a tangent, a lot of the cutting edge methodologies around designing things, whether it's a piece of software, whether it's a service or a new product, comes with communicating and really understanding what are the needs of the user experience. Or in healthcare, it could be the patient experience. In human resources or business, it's the employee experience. That's really important to start at the center of what are the needs we're filling. Who else? Who else can say, how is this important to the area that you want to serve? Let's hear from one more. I'll make it easier for you. What can go wrong if you don't collaborate well or communicate well? Who has an example? You can speak to either question.
I mean, I think simply will just fail.
Sorry?
Most likely will fail. Like,
yeah, if people don't communicate, things fail. Yeah. Have you had, okay, another in the back?
Sometimes people just do the same thing, like, so like there's a module and then two people do it, both do it, and then it's like, all good.
Yep, we can have redundancies, where two people could do the same thing. Have you ever, either yourself or someone that you've worked with, had to do something over again because they didn't quite understand it the first time? That happens a lot in the workplace. Yeah, I see some heads nodding and some hands going up. So it's interesting because not only in your field, but in the world, communication is important. As a matter of fact, the Harvard Business Review, which is one of the top business journals in the US, years ago polled its readers, who are primarily business managers in the US, and said, what is the #1 thing that will help you get promoted to an executive level in your company? And communication skills ranked #1. And that didn't surprise me, but what did surprise me is that it ranked larger than hard work, education, and I forget something else combined. Like, it was off the charts. That if you can communicate well, you will have a better chance of promotion. If you don't communicate well, that can actually limit you. And maybe you've seen that in your own lives. Have you ever known or worked with someone who is just brilliant? They have great ideas. They're really competent. They can do the work well. And yet, they struggle to communicate those ideas, struggle to get other people to understand and engage their ideas. And that's why I'm here. I want all of your genius to shine in the world. And to do that, you need to be able to communicate that. And if you're going to work in collaborative environments, which I imagine you will, you don't want the strongest personality to rule. You want the best ideas to rule. So that means not only being able to speak effectively, it also means being able to listen effectively with an open mind to be able to soften your position if there's a new idea that might even be better. So it's about giving and receiving of ideas. So what I'm about to share with you a little bit about methodology or framework, it's based on a framework called Nonviolent Communication. And it's interesting, nonviolent communication seems to have a special place in the Agile community, which is where I seem to be doing a lot of my conferences lately. It's especially useful in high-performing, collaborative, innovative team environments, which is how a lot of software is developed. It's based on empathy. And empathy is basically a deeper understanding of another person from their perspective, from their shoes. 12 years ago, I used to live in Bangkok, Thailand for 5 years. It was a great gig. And I learned to speak the Thai language to a certain degree. And what I like to say about empathy is it's our ability to understand people. And in the Thai language, the word to understand, it's actually really beautiful. Do we have any Thai speakers here? In Thai, it's khao jai. To understand someone, you khao jai. And literally, if you break down those words to understand, khao means to enter, like entering a door, for example. And jai means heart. So how cool is that? In the Thai language, to understand someone literally translates to entering their heart. So it's that level of empathy that can create a lot of the breakthroughs in business or help people get unstuck when people are stuck in positions or not listening to each other. Many of my colleagues who also teach this internationally call it collaborative communication, and some call it compassionate communication. And what's interesting is that even though nonviolent communication was developed here in the US, in my opinion, it's bigger outside the US for some reason. I don't know why. It's been used everywhere from Google to Lancome to Samsung, Merck, even the United Nations. And it's really lovely to see how these principles apply across industries, but also across cultures. Every year I spend about a month a year in China and Korea teaching this to business leaders there, as well as to MBA students at Nanjing University. So the skill set. The first and one micro skill that you're going to learn today that I hope you'll use the rest of your life is called the power of observation. And it's very simple. It's basically the ability to discern judgments, interpretations, analyses from facts. And as simple as it is, in a way it takes some unlearning. Because like you, I as an engineer was taught to always be interpreting, analyzing, looking 5 steps ahead, versus just looking at things as they are right now. So in a way, it's so simple, it's deceptively simple. So let's practice what we mean by this. We distinguish in this skill the difference between an observation versus evaluations, interpretations, judgments, or assumptions. And I'll give you a quick exercise. In a moment, I'll put on my best Halloween face, try to scare you. And I want you to tell me what you see. I want you to give me your observation. You ready? I'm gonna reinvent myself. So as soon as I turn around, I want you to shout out what you're observing. Ready? Okay, here we go. What do you see? What?
Eyes wide.
Sorry?
Eyes wide.
Eyes wide, yeah, what else? Okay.
You're excited?
Excited? Okay, what else?
Hands open, mouth open.
Hands open, mouth open, what else? Sorry? I heard something, a little voice. Amplify your friend.
You're standing taller.
Standing taller.
Hearing bigger.
Okay, going bigger. Okay, bravo. So let's look at some of the feedback we just got. Standing taller than before. Is that a fact or an interpretation?
Fact.
Fact. Hands up. Fact or interpretation?
Fact.
Fact. Excited. Fact or interpretation?
Interpretation.
Interpretation. Exactly. It's interesting. If you observe yourself, if you go into a meeting, go into a job interview, go on a date even, how naturally we basically interpret or judge things. The way someone shook my hand, the way someone looked at me. If someone was quiet, does that mean they're ignoring me or does that mean they're giving me space? So if you start observing your own behavior with other people, you might notice that the most instinctive thing we do is to jump to conclusions, to judge. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not here to shame anyone for judging, because we're always doing that. It's our judgment that helps us decide, you know, whether we trust our children with this babysitter or not. It's our judgment that tells us, you know, whether I should take this job or not. There's nothing wrong with judging, and yet, when we unconsciously judge, sometimes it can limit us in our power to influence other people and our power to make the most out of our own workplace. So let's go more specifically what we mean by that. One of the things that often happens in workplaces that people don't like is this thing called victim thinking. Have you ever worked with someone who kind of feels like a victim sometimes? Like, oh, you know, it's like, it's easy to feel sorry for yourself, or I have no control or power in my situation. Nobody wants that. And yet, it's something that often seeps into a lot of work situations. So how can we free ourselves from this type of victim thinking dynamic? And one of the ways is to take the skill that you just learned, distinguishing facts from judgments, a step further. In nonviolent communication, we also distinguish internal from external observations. Meaning, let's say, for example, you say something that I react to. I might feel angry or annoyed by. So, if I'm feeling angry, what are some physical sensations I might have in my body? Can you name a few?
Heart pump.
Yeah, I might feel my heart beating as I want to strangle you. Yes, what else?
Your muscles tense?
Yeah, muscle tension. Exactly. Anything else? And we're all different.
Fists are clenched.
Yeah, fists are clenched. You know, for me, it's the teeth sometimes. So we can have physical observations. I'm observing the tension, my fists, maybe heat, my heart. These are also observations, factual observations. Now, what about emotional observations? Let's say if I'm feeling angry, I can say, oh, I'm feeling angry. Is that if I tell you that I'm feeling angry, is that a fact or a judgment?
Judgment.
I am, you know, I kind of tricked you. This is kind of a gray area
Well,
question.
I mean, I can say I'm feeling angry, and that's just, but I'm not actually feeling angry. That's just a statement that I said.
Yeah, yeah. And what's interesting is anger is actually kind of a complex example, because anger is often a masking emotion to other things too, such as maybe sadness, but I want to protect myself with anger,
And
or
usually your anger,
disappointment.
sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Usually anger is directed towards something. Usually is I hate this, or I hate that, or I hate that person. It's that, yeah, I mean, like, you don't normally hear I'm angry unless you're the Hulk.
Exactly. Well, and you also said something that I think is really key, which is anger is often directed at someone. It's interesting that there's an expression that I love to use, that for every finger we point at someone, there's 3 fingers pointed back to us. So let me use another example, because I agree. Anger is kind of like a bit of a landmine. It can go in a lot of directions. Let's pick something that might be even more basic emotion. What about sadness? If I tell you that I'm sad, if I'm crying, and I say that I'm feeling sad, what is the chance that I might be wrong? Probably pretty low. I mean, if I'm crying and I'm feeling sad, then I'm feeling sad. It's probably pretty true, unless I'm fooling myself. But usually if I'm crying, it's pretty obvious. Now, what if I see tears in Professor Zeev's eyes?
Never.
Never happens. Only when you don't do your homework. So, if I see tears in his eyes.
Don't show up to class.
Oh, okay, only when you don't show up. Don't want to break his heart. Now, if I see tears in his eyes, does that mean he's sad?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, not necessarily. It's an interpretation. He could be having an allergic reaction. He could be have just laughed really hard at something, and tears could be in his eyes. So we don't know. When we see evidence of emotion in another person, it's basically an interpretation, because we have to check it out. Professor Zeev, were you crying? Are you sad?
Yeah, 5 people didn't show up to class.
Oh, I'll cry with you. Yes. So that's the thing that you have to check out, or own the fact that you're making an interpretation. But if I say I'm feeling sad in me, then we'll treat that as a fact. Remember this distinction because we're going to play a game in a little bit, and if you want to win the game, you need to know this distinction. So why is this distinction important? It's not just about winning a game. It's also about something that we call self-responsibility. I mentioned this idea of victim thinking earlier. And often what happens is when we feel like a victim, we feel like people are doing things to me. Whether it's bullying, whether it's limiting my options, not giving me what I want. And so when we take responsibility for our own feelings, this helps us shift into an area that's free of blame so that we can make more choices. So let me think if I can think of an example. So I can say, my boss doesn't appreciate me. Is that a judgment or a fact?
Judgment.
Yeah, that's a judgment. It's an interpretation, a judgment, based on certain facts. What if I say, my boss didn't give me a bonus this year? Is that a fact or an interpretation?
Fact.
Yeah, that would be a fact. So from that fact, I might interpret, my boss doesn't appreciate me. Okay. So if I want to own my feelings, instead of saying I feel unappreciated, which is still kind of a form of victim thinking, someone's not appreciating me. You know, I could say I feel angry or I feel sad because I want more appreciation. It's a subtle distinction, but it removes the interpretation. So I'm guessing this will get more grounded as we actually practice it. So let's introduce the game. In a moment, you're going to get together with your teams. How many teams do we have in the room here, approximately? How many are you? About 9 teams? Okay. So they're fairly small groups. Okay, so the 9 teams, you'll be competing against each other. And what you'll be able to do in this game is, this will be a floor exercise. And because the seats are fixed, you're going to be challenged to find room, probably in the hallway, maybe 2 or 3 groups up here, maybe a group in the corridor back there. And each of you will get a deck of observations and interpretations. And your job is to put all of the judgments, all of the interpretations in a row on the floor, and next to it, make another row of the facts that correspond to the judgment. So you have 2 columns, one of judgments, one of observable facts, and then they need to laterally correspond. One is an interpretation of the other. Any questions about how this works? Okay, break into your teams. As soon as your team is ready, raise your hand and I'll give you a set. Oh, you have a question?
We're just already
Okay,
sitting next to
okay. I need you guys to stand in a circle with space on the floor, and then I'll grab it to you.
Can we just?
I would like
And actually, let's do 2. Okay, let's debrief this for a second. Who can tell me, how is this skill, this ability to speak in facts, free of judgment, how can that be helpful in the workplace when you work with others? 1 and then 2.
I mean, when you talk about facts, there's less disagreement because everyone has their own judgment, but if you say it with what's in front of you, there's no real way to disagree with the
Absolutely.
reality of things.
Yeah, when you speak in terms of facts, it's impossible for someone to disagree with you. What else? We had someone in the back? Let's hear from one more person. Who else? How can this skill be helpful to you in the workplace when you work with others?
communicating with facts rather than judgments.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with the fact. There's a lot of applications for this. As simple as it seems, how many of you have actually gone through a performance evaluation? Right? Okay. Okay, we have a lot of hands go up. So in performance evaluations, Were they 100% fact, or did you ever hear any judgment to your performance? Oftentimes they're laden with judgments, and sometimes those judgments might be accurate and sometimes they're not. For example, it's very common for people to feel not appreciated just because no one ever says anything. Does that mean if my boss is silent, does that mean they see me or not? Maybe I am invisible. Or maybe they appreciate me, but they're not a very good communicator. There are many examples of this. As a matter of fact, a lot of performance evaluation forums are just filled with judgments. How much is this person a team player? How much are you supporting other colleagues? Well, what are the activities that you are saying? What are the actions? What are the things that you will say or do that are considered supportive versus people's feelings of how supportive you are, which are far more subjective? So one of the ways that this can be helpful, especially in team environments, is when you're working with a behavior that you may not like. One of the things in teams, have you ever been in a team where people are not having equal workloads? Some people do most of the work and other people are kind of getting by more easily. I'm seeing heads nod. Yeah, that happens in teams. Or have you ever had an issue with punctuality or someone not being present or showing up? Sometimes when we're in a team environment, we have two choices. We can either allow unwanted behavior to go on and we just grow increasingly resentful, or we can show support for each other by saying, hey man, or hey woman, let's talk about what's getting in the way of the kind of performance we want. And that's what we're going to work on for the rest of this class, is how can you have those discussions that might not be easy to have about how we can do things better. So this skill that you just learned can be useful in these hard-to-hear discussions. Parents like to use this skill a lot too, believe it or not. So for example, if you start with a fact, instead of you've got a punctuality issue or you don't care about this team, I could just say, hey, I noticed that you arrived late 3 days this week. And then I could even have an awkward silence and let you speak for yourself. Or I could be curious. Without accusing you, I could say, express some care. Is there something going on that's getting in the way of you showing up here on time? Do we need to adjust anything on our side, for example? Do you have to drop your kid off at daycare and this is the quickest you can get here? We don't know. So it often helps to suspend judgment. Just state the fact and then allow the discussion to flow. This one might be harder for people to hear. I notice you interrupting your colleagues several times during the meeting. Have you ever been in a meeting where someone interrupts a lot? You see this in news programs a lot. It drives me crazy. If I was someone's boss, often our job is to coach employees. This could be the beginning of a coaching conversation. As a matter of fact, something like this happened to me when I was a young engineer. And it was really hard to hear, and yet in retrospect, I was grateful. I worked for an environmental firm starting out after my undergraduate. And I worked with a geologist named Bruce. And one day, Bruce, we were talking in the hallway, and before he walked away, he turned around, and Bruce said, Lorraine, have you ever noticed that whenever we talk, you're the last person to always say something? And then I'm like, because I realized that if I said something then I'd be the last person to say something again. So I'm like, and then I realized it was true. I started watching myself in meetings and observing myself. It's like, oh my God, I always have to get the last word in. What's up with that? And it's so funny because, what are we, 30 years later, I'm still mindful of that. And so it's interesting how sometimes just a simple observation, a factual observation, can help to influence behavior, people to take more responsibility for themselves. It's also, oops, oh, no more examples. It's also a great way to reduce gossip. How many of you have worked in organizations or in teams where there's gossip? You see that? Yeah, gossip is toxic. I mean, if someone has a problem with someone, you want them to have the respect to address that directly with that person, not turn your back to that person and complain to the rest of the world how much you dislike that. So one of the ways to beat gossip or to reduce gossip is, first of all, not to enable it. It's just like bullying. Bullying wouldn't happen if people didn't enable it. It's about the power of the bystander. So if you're a bystander and you hear someone gossip, you can use the power of observation as a way to gently invite that person to take responsibility for themselves and hopefully have the dignity and the respect to address it directly with their colleagues. So instead of just listening to someone gossip and say, oh yeah, that's so terrible, you could ask that person. If someone says, oh, that person doesn't know what they're doing, or that person is stupid or is a bad manager, or whatever the judgment is, you can simply ask them a simple coaching question, which is, well, what did that person say or do that gave you that idea, or that helped contributed to your opinion of them? So that simple question is, what did that person say or do that gave you that conclusion that this person isn't fit to be on my team or is a bad manager or whatever? Simply asking people about, well, what is the observation? What did you experience with that person? Invites them to step into their own facts and take ownership. It's a very gentle way of reducing gossip in an organization. And I invite you to do that. Otherwise, the silent bystander, or even worse, the person who takes sides, will just help to amplify the gossip and create a more toxic work environment. So, any questions about what we just learned before we introduce our tool? Okay, it's real simple, and yet it could take a lifetime to apply well. This is my 4th grade rendition of, can you guess what the picture is?
Iceberg.
Yeah, iceberg, good. So it is decipherable. So the tool that we're going to use next, and this is a tool that you can apply if you are a team leader, a team facilitator, an agile coach, anyone or someone who just runs a meeting, a manager. This is something that you can apply to make it easy and safe for people to speak up about how to do things better. Whether it's in a team, a company, a strategic planning session. You can even do this for your relationship. How can I make this marriage better or this relationship? So it's a universal tool that you can apply to make anything better, to make it easy to talk about that. And it's based on this model. This is a key concept of nonviolent communication. This idea of underlying human needs versus strategies. So what is the biggest part of the iceberg? Is it the part that's under the water or over the water? Yeah, the part that's underwater. And what's the part that sank the Titanic? Yeah, it's the part that it's the stuff you don't see that can kill you. And that's what happens when we communicate. Everything we say or do is driven, is motivated by an underlying need. That's a key concept of nonviolent communication. And it's an important concept because when we connect with the underlying needs, the drivers, we can save time. I did a 6-month program as part of a team in New York for the Center for Collaborative Communication that did a nonviolent communication-based leadership training at Merck Pharmaceutical. They were able to cut their meeting time in half after a 6-month program, just using connecting with needs and applying the general principles of nonviolent communication, because you can quickly get to what matters most in people. So let's talk more about what we mean by needs. Let's say if a mosquito bites me and I have an itch, right? I'm itchy. I have a need for relief. What might be my behavior or my strategy for addressing that need? What might I do? I'm itchy. What would I do?
It's great.
Yeah, I scratch. So I have a behavior that's meeting a need. Ha! So let's say I have a need for security. Let's say financial security. What might be some strategies that I would use for that?
Budget?
Yeah, set a budget, right? So I can manage my money. Anything else? How can I get financial security? Yeah.
Wealth accumulation in general.
Yeah, wealth accumulation in general. I could be a good saver. I could manage my money. I could get a high-paying job. I could cut my expenses. These are all different strategies. let's say, for example, I have a need for love in my life. What are some strategies I might use for that? Come on, young people. I see people smiling. What are your strategies?
Go out.
Yeah, get out there, meet people. What else? Yeah.
Good hygiene.
Good hygiene, thank you.
Very important.
Breath mints go a long way, people. Good shower. Actually, breath mint wouldn't be hygiene. That would be covering up bad hygiene, perhaps. Yeah. So, anything else?
Online dating.
Yeah, online dating. Yeah, swipe left or right. So, yeah, so these are all strategies, probably with various degrees of success, for meeting my need for love. So these are things that are underlying needs. Things like love, respect, trust, appreciation, integrity, security, comfort, ease, efficiency. A lot of people call these underlying needs values. They're things that every single human being can value. Money is not necessarily a need. It's a strategy to meet a need. For example, it's a strategy to meet my sense of security, for example. Or maybe my sense of choice. I might have a need for choice. The more money I have, the more options I have in my life, for example. So we're going to use a tool that's based on this distinction. And this distinction is exactly what's going to make it easy to speak in ways that make it easy for people to hear you without getting defensive. So one of the other idea to note is that conflict occurs at the level of strategy, and connection and possibility at the level of needs, which is why they call it collaborative communication. And it's used in innovation in teams as well. And a quick example of that, what if I told you that I have a high need for safety in my life? It's true, I grew up in Los Angeles in a pretty rough neighborhood. I even lived in Compton for a little while as a kid. And I know what it's like to have helicopters, over the backyard, and I know what it's like to have my parents freak out if I disappeared on my bike for a while and they don't know where I am, and they're concerned about my safety. And here I am now, as an older woman of the world who loves to travel, and I'd like to know that I feel safe if I'm wandering the streets of Barcelona at night, or that I can travel on my own and not worry about looking over my shoulder if I'm going to make it safely to where I'm going. So, given my own life experiences, can you have some empathy for me on my need for safety? Can you appreciate how important that is to me, both in the story of my life as well as how my life is at this moment? And in your own way, can you appreciate how safety is important to you? Even though you might not have the same life experience that I do, can you have some empathy for yourself that this is something that matters to both of us? And because it matters to both of us, we can share a connection, a human connection over this need for safety. Now, enjoy that sense of connection. This is empathy. And yet, see how easy we can move from connection to conflict. What if I tell you that the way that I meet my need for safety now is that I carry a gun with me in my purse? That's not true. But how do you feel about me now? How empathic, how sweetly connected do you feel to me now that I tell you that I'm packing a gun? Now, depending on maybe where you grew up, or based on your politics, or how you feel about guns, some of you might actually feel closer to me. The fact that I'm here in Southern California, I'm guessing that most of you might feel more disconnected with me. So you might even be angry, like how dare you bring in a lethal weapon to a classroom? Right? I don't. So this is a quick example of how a strategy can connect or disconnect. Similarly, let's say my need for love, right? I might have a strategy to go out and meet people, and that could be very effective. But it could also turn to conflict if, let's say, my need for love, I use as an excuse to cheat on someone or to betray people. So strategies is what creates conflict. So that's another important distinction to know when we use this tool. Okay. Okay, so here's how the next exercise is going to go. Each of your teams, and this time we have one for each team, is going to get a set of needs cards. Each card has different needs on them. Sustainability, respect, trust, simplicity, you name it. All kinds of ones to choose from. And there'll be 3 magic questions. Basically, you'll pass out the cards in your team, and this will be a floor exercise as well, just like you did with the last one. You'll spread the cards on the floor for everyone to see in your team, and then you'll pick a card of something that you would like to see more of. Take that back, it's not 3 questions. I think I made it simpler for you than this. You pick one card that I would like to see more of. So for example, let's say I pick responsibility. In your team, you'll all take turns sharing your card and using the power of observation that you just learned to say, what would that look like? So I would say, in my team, I would like to see more responsibility. And what would that look like? Okay, that would look like for me, everyone showing up on time when we agree to meet. That you're responsible for getting here. And would also mean that we talk about the workload to make sure that we all have a balanced workload or have clearer roles so that we don't duplicate each other's work or are trying to guess each other. So I can say, this is what responsibility would look like to me on our team. So try to keep it as factual as you can, because that'll make it easier to hear. If I say responsibility means we don't throw each other under the bus, is that a fact or a judgment? That's a judgment. So you want to talk about it in terms of facts as much as you can. And then, oh, it's that simple. So 2 steps. Pick a card, and then go around the circle in your team, show your card and say, this is something I would like to see more of on this team. And here's what it could look like, or it would look like. And I want to acknowledge that this might take some courage, because sometimes if there's a behavior that we don't like in a team, it's not easy to say, and it might not be easy to hear. Just like my colleague Bruce telling me about me being the last one to say some things at meetings. So my invitation to you is to do this not with the intention to out each other or to, of course you all care about each other. So to do it with care. That your honesty is a gift of care and a gift of support for each other and for the performance of your team. And if you can do that well in this little laboratory of Professor Zeev's class, hopefully you can continue to do it well in your life. Because it's that kind of honesty, gentle, caring honesty, that can go a long way in the workplace to support each other and to support our own development. Any questions about how this works? Okay, please break into your teams, and each team, you don't have to combine like we did the last time. You can do just each individual team, and you'll all get a set of cards. And let's see, Professor Zeev, how are we doing on time? If we could finish in okay, so let's debrief this. One of the things that I like to do is anyone who asks me to speak, I like to invite them to participate in the exercises as well. So I invited Professor Zeev to also participate in his own way in the exercise that you just did. And so to make life a little easier on you, we're going to start the debrief with him. Would you mind sharing your observation and or your quality, your need that you would like to see more of, and what that would look like using the power of observation?
Yes, so first of all, I observed a lot of commotion and good reaction, so please let's make sure we get some time for them to tell you how it went for them. They never interact like that with me, so I think you must be doing something right. And then completely randomly and without ill intent, I picked up the cards respect and dependability. And I wanted to connect them, to relate them to some of the items that were mentioned earlier that you picked up actually in a non-coordinated with me about being punctual, showing up to meetings, being reliable and responsible towards your teammates, Even more so meetings with sponsors, you know, they make time to meet with you, make sure you meet with them. If you're not available for a few days, let each other know. All of that stuff should be a little bit more systemized going forward. You know, I care about your team's success, I care about the project's success. If you remember, there was a little assignment in the beginning of the quarter called Communication Covenant, where you were supposed to punish each other for not showing up to meetings, and the person has to buy everyone else pizza and all that stuff. It's time to exercise the big stick that you can wield with your communication covenant. But seriously, from a nonviolent communication, without the pizza threat, this should happen more naturally, and especially by way of respecting each other. This is the time of midterms and lots of busyness for other classes. People have jobs, people have emergencies. Just let everybody know. And by now you should definitely be on Facebook groups, on Slack, on any kind of instant media that will at least allow you to communicate. You know, when I was growing up many years ago, you could really disappear for a few days or be a software cowboy and say, hey, I'm following the waterfall model, I'll come back to you in week 10. But in today's world, you can't do that anymore, okay? So what I'm hoping for is very strong communication going forward.
Does that, I'm curious, does that show up in their grade anywhere? Or?
It might. It might adversely affect their grade.
All right, thank you for modeling.
Yeah, no problem.
Anything else? Or?
No.
Okay.
I want to hear from them.
Yeah, so I'm curious, how did that go for you? Anything that you found particularly easy or hard? Can we hear from a couple people? How was it?
This one,
It was fun? What did you enjoy?
I like bringing in suggestions for improving on your team ethics.
Yeah, bringing in ideas for how we can improve.
How can you improve your performance?
Yeah. How many of you actually heard some ideas that you can act on? Most of you? Okay. I'm hoping the ones that didn't raise their hand are just too shy to do it. So, did anyone find some difficulty? Was it a stretch in any way? I'm hoping it was to some degree. Yeah?
It's kind of hard kicking the card at first because, like, you didn't want to be super critical, like you said, but at the same time, you're also you had to bring up points during with the group activity.
Yeah. So you want to blow anyone out of the water,
Right.
but you also want it to be constructive and useful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like that you use the word critical, that you don't want it to be critical. I think that's a really important word, because if we can speak in terms of facts and in terms of values or qualities that we like, in a way it frees us from being critical, because we're talking in terms of good things. We want more consistency or more accountability or more respect or more integrity, whatever that is. That doesn't sound as critical as, less of a bad thing. Pulling your own weight, punctuality, things like that. Also using the power of observation frees up the idea that it's a criticism, because we're just stating facts. And then the last thing is, and I'm glad you actually modeled this really well. You talked about what you care about. And it's interesting, because sometimes people can say things that are free of judgment, and yet it can still feel like a criticism based on the tone of their voice, the look on their face. But if you can actually deliver these messages with care, that your honesty is a gift of support, then you have a better chance of someone receiving it as a gift of care. Have you ever had maybe a colleague or a friend maybe tell you something that might have been hard to hear, but you really felt the love in it? Has that ever happened to you? Whether it could even be the spinach in your teeth. So I like that you use the word criticism, because how we interpret things as critical has a lot to do with how it's delivered. And I'm hoping that the tool that you just got will help reduce the chance of it being received as critical and more received as a gift of support. So I don't want to leave you high and dry. I want to leave you with the resources to do this in your own life. And so I will follow up with Professor Zeev after this class and get you a handout version of the cards that you just used, so that you can use the same exercise in future teams or future environments. Instead of using a card to say what do you want more of, you can use the handout and maybe circle the needs that you want more of. And as well as a copy of these slides if you want to remember this technique, this tool. So let's see. We have just a couple of minutes left. Take a moment and just, I'd like you to, if you take one thing away, if you take one note, if you write one thing down, this is it. Take a moment and just silently reflect and write down to yourself to remember, what was the most valuable thing that you learned today? And how do you intend to apply it? And I hope you're specific. Like, are you going to apply it tonight when you come home and talk to someone? Are you going to apply it at your next meeting with your team? What did you learn, or what did you get from today? It could be anything. And how will you apply it? And I invite you to write that down so you can take that with you. And then we'll close this part of the class by asking for a couple people to share their examples. So we'll give you a moment of silent reflection.
Can I make an announcement in the
Sure.
middle of silent reflection?
Yes.
Because I have to go to the other class because they have a midterm, the Poor Souls in Informatics 43. Aren't you happy you passed that stage?
Yes.
And so I don't want to be late, but at the end, if there's a couple of minutes, please hang out with Lorraine for if you want some personal communication or one-on-one, right? You can stay a few minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Great. And then I know Tao wants to talk to some teams, but I don't know which ones. So figure it out with Tao, and I ask 3 of you to talk to Bobby as well. All right, back to silent reflection.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank
What
you.
is their official end time?
4:50.
Okay.
So just,
Great.
okay.
All right. Thank you, Professor Zhang. We'll give you about 1 minute of silence, and please take a note to yourself what you want to take away. And while the rest of you are still thinking, could we hear a couple examples to help stimulate people's thinking? Who would like to share?
Just in terms of what our most valuable thing we learned was.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most valuable thing I learned today was differentiating, and even in the most subtle parts, between facts and non-objective type ideas and thoughts and feelings. Sometimes in the workplace you deal with people that have very strong personalities, and sometimes that makes it very difficult to reach a common strategic goal. So I think utilizing the tool that we the last exercise that we had helps break barriers and achieve a common sense of unity and help maybe achieve that strategic goal better.
Cool, thanks. For those of you in the back who might not be able to hear it so well, check me if I got this correct. You said a lot of good stuff. Is that this distinguishing the subtleties between facts and observations and applying this last exercise can be helpful if you're working especially with strong personalities, because it can make it easier to really focus on what the team needs to do its best. Or did I miss anything? Or?
No,
Okay.
that's good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Who else would like to share something that they got from this class?
I think sometimes we might get too caught up in like finishing these assignments and like reaching these goals that we might like push some of these problems to the corner. But like after on the assignments and our goals.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I imagine especially when you have a high demand, a very demanding job, whether it's as a capstone student or in the workplace, it's really easy just to have tunnel vision and only focus on the project or the work in front of you. And you can't have good relationships unless you invest in them. So by looking at the bigger picture, how do we actually work together? Yeah, you get good at what you see. Yeah, if we don't see it or pay attention to it, we can't nurture it. So great, thanks. That's a great insight. Anyone else? Let's hear from one more. One more takeaway from today. I'm hoping there's a whole ocean of them. Yeah.
If you focus on the needs while communicating with someone, you have higher chances of making a connection, as opposed to if you focus on their actions or just their strategies that they're utilizing.
Awesome. Yeah, for those of you in the back, focusing on the needs gives you a much higher chance of success, that you'll be able to connect with that person and they'll hear you than just focusing on the strategies. So the breakthroughs, even innovative breakthroughs or thinking out of the box happens when we connect with those needs. So as well as problem solving, conflict resolution. So yeah, that's a great takeaway. All right, any last questions? I will be available afterwards if you have any more personal or one-to-one. Please use this well, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks.